Hello everyone and welcome to the Humanitarian Leadership Academy webinar series. And today we're going to be exploring personal perspectives on localisation. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome three brilliant speakers who you'll be hearing from today. I'll introduce them to you all shortly. My name is Carmen Parkinson. I'm Communications and Marketing Advisor here at the HLA, and I'm based near Manchester in the UK. If you'd like to introduce yourself in the chat as you're joining us, please do. If you'd like to type your name, your organisation, and where you're joining us from, that would be great. So I'm delighted to welcome two brilliant panellists today for our discussion. So welcome to Carlo Gherardi, who's the Regional Director for the Central and Eastern Europe Regional Office, and Wahidun Nabi, who's Regional OCD, so that's Organisational Capacity Development and Partnership Coordinator for the Save the Children International Asia Regional Office. So Carlo joins us from Warsaw, Poland, and Nabi joins us from Dhaka, Bangladesh. So a huge thank you and welcome to Carlo and Nabi for joining us today. I'm absolutely delighted to welcome back Gita Modgil as our facilitator for today's discussion. Gita is an independent senior humanitarian aid director based in Amman, Jordan. If you joined us for last month's brilliant humanitarian careers webinar, you'll remember Gita, who shared her career story and advice for you all, together with co-panelist Thomas Hill, who's the country director for the NRC in Nigeria. So if you missed that brilliant session, and I'm not just saying that because Gita's here today, but if you missed that session, please do check that out on our YouTube channel. So thank you, Gita, Carlo and Nabi, and welcome to everyone joining us. It's great to see people starting to introduce themselves in the chat. It's nice to see some familiar names from the HLA community introducing themselves, as well as some new ones. So that's great if you're joining us for the first time today. So welcome to Maria, Khadija, Said, I think I remember you from last time, from Morocco, Zainab, Kasahun, Paulina, Erin. So welcome to all of you. It's brilliant to welcome you here to this learning and discussion space this month. So in case this is the first time you've joined an HLA webinar, or you're not quite familiar with our work, just a little bit about us. So localisation is at the heart of what we do, and it's one of our strategic pillars shaping and guiding our work. So at the HLA, our mission is to strengthen people's skills and capabilities through learning, working with people in the humanitarian sector and beyond to prepare for and respond to crises. We're a sector-facing team within Save the Children, with a presence in the UK and 6 regional centres around the world. And together we combine our collective expertise to deliver in-person, blended and online capacity strengthening initiatives. So this ranges from everything from education emergencies, humanitarian operations, coaching, leadership, and much, much more. So if you're interested to learn a bit more about what we do, please do take a look at our website. A quick agenda and housekeeping before I hand over to our panellists and facilitator for today's session. So this is the 5th webinar in our Shift series, which are deep dive sessions into localisation. So we've explored topics such as local resource mobilisation, MENA region perspectives, refugee response in Poland, and the Near Networks LPMF, I think it stands for. Yeah, the measurement framework. So please do check out the recordings on our YouTube channel if you've missed those. So as I mentioned, I'll shortly hand over to our panellists who will be sharing short presentations with us, sharing their personal perspectives on localisation. So Carlo will present first, followed by Nabi. So Carlo's going to be talking about the experience of the NRC and his Central and Eastern Europe Regional Office and the localisation processes and context of local actors involved in the Ukraine response. And Nabi will be sharing a flexible funding model by Save the Children and sharing some of his personal perspectives based on his personal interest in this area and experiences of working with civil society organisations, which is an area that he's very passionate about. And then after this, Gita will take the mic and will ask Carlo and Nabi some questions and share some reflections based on their presentations. And then following this, you'll have the opportunity to put your questions to our panelists via Gita. So as we're going along, as Carlo and Nabi present, if any questions come to mind, please do type those into the Zoom Q&A function, and then we'll select some to put to Carlo and Nabi. So we'll try our best to get through as many as we can in the time that we have, which is until up to 90 minutes this session. Just a little bit of housekeeping before I hand over to our brilliant speakers. So this webinar is being recorded, and a copy of the YouTube link and a slide deck will be shared with you in the post-event email. That will land in your inbox within the next 24 hours. As I mentioned, please use the Zoom Q&A function rather than the chat to type your questions for the panelists for our panel discussion at the end. The chat can be used for any reflections that you may have or reactions to the presentations. As a kind reminder, please keep any questions or comments that you have for our panelists and facilitator respectful and on topic, so relevant to the topic of localisation in the humanitarian sector. For accessibility, you can turn on Zoom captions, so click on More at the bottom of your screen and then Show Captions. And you can select your language as well for auto-generated translations. And then finally, an HPAS digital badge is available for all live webinar attendees in recognition of your engagement and learning in this forum today. So look out for a separate email after this webinar with details of how to claim your digital badge. Now, without further ado, I'd like to hand you over to Carlo Gherardi from the Norwegian Refugee Council. Over to you, Carlo.
Thanks, Kaman, and I hope everyone can hear me okay. And thanks very much for the opportunity to be here today and discuss localization and our approach to local actors in the Central Europe response. I'll talk a bit about the state of play and some of the general trends that we're seeing in Ukraine and neighboring countries, and then zoom in a bit onto NRC's approach in the region and some of the lessons and some of the changes that are happening inside the Norwegian Refugee Council when it comes to localization, and then a few personal reflections. Next slide, please. Come on, thanks. Yes, you can move on. So looking back, we obviously had the invasion in 2022 in Ukraine and an explosion of international assistance, a huge scale up of international organizations arriving in Ukraine, Poland, Moldova, Romania, responding to the massive needs that we saw, both internally displaced populations and refugees, and also an increasing number of Ukrainian organizations. And there was already a very strong civil society presence in the region, but the number of agencies that are responding in Ukraine since February 2022 has now increased fivefold. International and national. 60% of these are Ukrainian. So what we've seen in Central and Eastern Europe is a huge increase in the number of organizations that are registering as humanitarian actors, as development actors, working in the aid sectors and the international structures. But what we also see, and here are a few figures on the slide, is that when you look at the percentage of funding which is going to Ukrainian organizations responding in Ukraine, it still remains minuscule, tiny. So we're talking about pretty much it was around 1% in 2022. And when you take the various billions together for the different response plans, we're looking at 0.07% of total funding, which is going directly to Ukrainian organizations. So we have a huge civil society base. We have a historic civil society base in the region. We have a massive crisis with huge amounts of funding coming in, and we're seeing a lot of progress, but we're also seeing very, very little of that funding directly going to Ukrainian organizations. And yet, Ukraine is in many ways the perfect place for local actor engagement. There's a very, very strong civil society, as I've mentioned, very vocal. You have a strong established private sector. You have a very well functioning government system with local authorities very engaged. You have very good telecommunications, digital platforms, banking systems, an extremely highly educated society to draw on in terms of resources. So all the ingredients are there to support local organizations in Ukraine and the neighboring countries. Next slide, please. And I mentioned that civil society was and is very, very strong in the region and has also been able to advocate for stronger localization. And just on a side note, I think the UN, INGOs, and donors have from the beginning recognized that Central and Eastern Europe and the response in Ukraine needs to be as locally led as possible and needs to be one of the responses that we try our best to engage and develop and do more through local actors than we have done in the past. Partly as part of our organizational commitment to the Grand Bargain, to increasing our engagement and what localization means for us, but also because of the context being so enabling. But Ukrainian civil society and Polish civil society especially have also been very vocal in holding the international community to account in the past years and saying, hang on, guys, you're putting loads of money into this response, you're giving it to the UN, you're giving it to INGOs. Why are we not at the forefront of your agreements? Why is more not coming to us? So there have been open letters signed by hundreds of local organizations holding and pushing the international community to live up to its commitments under the Grand Bargain. In Ukraine, there was a big national workshop on localization led by civil society, which brought together donors, government, stakeholders, INGOs, which landed on these 5 priorities and pillars that needed to be, from their perspective, the structure of the response needed to be based on these pillars. So increasing the funding, harmonizing verification processes, stopping every organization from having different reporting templates and making it easier for local organizations and less bureaucratic, supporting their capacity where they need it. And then, yes, enforcement of equitable hiring practices and making sure that UN and INGOs were not taking resources away from local organizations at the expense of those local organizations. And then a very, very key one, which I think is relevant globally, is tailoring coordination mechanisms to those which are used by and existing in Ukraine already in civil society networks and in neighboring countries as well. So we've had a very, very active engagement with local organizations in the region and felt very much the pressure to deliver on the commitments and the language that has been coming from the various international agreements in the past few years. Next slide, please. And there has been progress. There has been real change, and I think it's really important to acknowledge that. Local organizations now sit on the UN Humanitarian Financing Board, so making decisions about which organizations and which programs are being funded. The UN has dedicated a 70 million fund based on localization principles. If you look at the amount of money that's being transferred now through those local funds, it's up to 30%. So the money is being really earmarked for local organizations much, much more effectively. We have at least one major donor which is changing its own internal policies to support the fast tracking of local organizations and contracting them directly. Local organizations are sitting in the humanitarian country team meetings. And we have also homegrown initiatives. So we have Ukrainian organizations that have set up coordination mechanisms for vetting so that which INGOs have signed up to, making it easier for them, once vetted once, to be considered vetted by everyone. And international efforts like the Disasters Emergency Committee and the START Network are establishing pooled funds for Ukrainian organizations only. So there has been really specific change, I think, and practical change, which is making it easier for local organizations to sit at the table, sit on the key coordination platforms, contribute to decision making and access funding. But of course, there are still many obstacles to what many of us would like to see moving forwards. Donor requirements, which we all know are burdensome for international organizations as well, continue to be extremely challenging to overcome for many local organizations. And we have to remember that civil society is not homogenous. We have incredible organizations working across the response here, which are 2 or 3 people doing fantastic advocacy on a specific subject. We don't have small mini NGOs that look like international organizations, but smaller versions running around. It's very, very different. And many of them have no way of ever meeting international donor requirements as it stands today. Then we, as INGOs, also have requirements and reporting requirements, which are aside from the donor ones and which are extremely complicated in some cases. Each of us use different systems. Principles. Now, this is a very difficult one, especially in Ukraine. In Ukraine, humanitarian assistance, even by law, includes some military hardware and military equipment, which is against, obviously, the humanitarian principle. So working with humanitarian organizations that are able to fully embrace humanitarian principles and who are not supporting military efforts is a challenge, especially in Ukraine, much less in neighboring countries, of course. And then the fear from donors of corruption and aid diversion, which is not unique to the Ukraine context, but which is something which lowers their risk appetite and makes it more difficult to change some of the other obstacles I mentioned earlier. Thanks. Next slide, please. Looking at NRC and how the context and the response in Ukraine has changed us as an organization, we've actually been in Ukraine since 2014, working with local partners, but a small country operation, very much in the east along the contact line. And like everybody else, we scaled up massively after February 2022 in Ukraine, across the whole country, and in Moldova and Poland and Romania. And I think what was interesting was that from the beginning, the organization took the decision that in neighboring countries, in Poland and Moldova, we would go we would work on the basis of 2 very clear pillars: digital and local actors. So in Poland, we actually have a country operation which works only through partners. We had a transit site also at Warsaw East Station, which is now closed. And we have a country operation which has never happened before for NRC, which only operates through local partners. In Moldova, it's a hybrid system with some direct implementation, and again, a majority of partners. And in Ukraine as well, we also have increased the number of partners that we have. So we actually have 70 local, or more than 70 now, local partners across the response. That isn't just NGOs, that's also university, that's also local authorities, that's also the private sector. We have given more than 12% of our funding through local actors. Our ambition is still 25%, but that's where we are today. And for NRC, and for those of you on the webinar who know NRC a bit, we are traditionally a direct implementing agency. So partnership is something which NRC is learning about and increasing and doing, but it's not traditionally been the NRC way. Next slide, please. I mentioned government and local authorities and the private sector, and I think it's important to highlight those because often when we talk about localization, people think about NGOs and local CBOs. For us, it's very much also everything that is in the community. And of course, that means decision makers at the government level, both at national ministry level, but extremely important that we have strong linkages and partnerships also with local authorities who are coordinating the response. And then the private sector and corporate work, this response has really been unique. I've never seen a response in my career which has had so much engagement from the private sector, both in terms of private companies actively engaging in fundraising and supporting humanitarian efforts, but also in terms of the linkages, whether it's on innovation, digital, or service provision that the private sector has stepped up in Poland and in Ukraine, especially, is not something that I've seen before. And the willingness of corporate actors to sign agreements and to engage in discussions with humanitarian organizations is also something that we're leveraging here and trying to see how it can improve the quality of our operations, the people we reach, and to really bring a different dimension to the response. So important to mention that. Next slide, please. So a few reflections from the NRC side is that we are still learning. This is very much a journey for the organization. This response in Central and Eastern Europe is being used as a platform to change procedures and systems which impact other parts of the organization and other regions where we work, because it is about internally changing systems when they're set up on the finance side, the reporting side, and every other element to respond directly, to then change that in a way which works effectively and efficiently with local actors, and not just to burden them with huge amounts of bureaucracy and ask them to develop mini NRC systems, which would be a disaster. But I think that beyond the systems, organizationally, the big challenge and the big progress that we've made here is changing people's mindsets and changing people's understanding of what localization means, why we should be doing it, what it can bring to the organization, why we should be making these changes, and why it makes our response better. And I think that that's a journey that we continue to be on, and it's by no means universally accepted that that NRC should be an organization that only works through local actors. But I think the mindset element and behavioral change, organizational change, is really important, and it shouldn't be underestimated when looking at practical things like systems as well. Emergency response has been another challenge for us. So signing partners and making partnership agreements when you have fast, rapid onset crisis is not easy, because it takes time, it takes discussion, and especially when you're trying to do it right and not just transfer risk, but actually develop proper partnerships, it's not easy to do that in the middle of an emergency response setting. So those have been challenging for us in terms of how to find the right partners and how to build that into our response. I mentioned the principled side of the response, and that also, especially in Ukraine, has been difficult, and continues to really be a journey together with organizations about what it means to respond in a context like Ukraine with Ukrainian staff in the middle of a conflict in a principled way. And I would be really keen to hear reflections from others as well. And then, of course, continuing to invest, but in a declining funding environment, is a challenge, and how to make sure that what we're leaving behind is sustainable and that we're not just investing in short-term wins to then find ourselves having to lose all of that when the funding drops is really, really important. Next slide. I think there's one more. Yes, but in general, I do think that the Ukraine response is moving the needle on localization. And I think that because I've seen donors doing things in this response that I haven't seen them be willing to take on in others. And I mentioned the fast tracking of local actors, but also the way that they're looking at their own systems, the way that the localization agenda is at the top of all of the discussions with stakeholders in this response is something that I think is making it something that will impact the sector more broadly as we move forwards. And linked to the last point there, there's been a huge amount of investment in learning. So we have reports, we have frameworks, we have engagement from local actors, baseline studies, and we have to keep building that learning and seeing how organizations can integrate that into their own responses and into contexts like this, where the community can learn from each other and support each other. The principles I mentioned are a challenge. We need to coordinate better. This isn't just about local actors in general, but when it comes to local actors, we need to coordinate better and not compete. In Ukraine, because localization was such an important element of the response and organizations needed to demonstrate that they were working with partners with the community, the gravitation towards a few key local national stakeholders was huge, and they had everybody competing to work with them. And often that became overwhelming and saturating for national civil society in a context where there was so much assistance coming in. And then localization and partnership still means very different things to different people. If you go to a group of 10 different INGOs in the Ukraine response and ask them what localization means, you probably get 10 different answers. And different organizations have very different concepts of localization. Local organizations, Ukrainian, Polish organizations, have very different understanding to us about localization and have very strong opinions about what localization means. So we need to be careful about also not trying to own a term that doesn't mean anything to actual local organizations that we work with. And so overall, I would say that it's a very interesting and dynamic context. I think that it is a context where a lot of progress has been made, but where, as I showed on the first slide, in terms of actually resources going to local organizations, there's still a huge amount of work to do. I'll stop there. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Carlo. That was really, really enlightening. I'd like to now bring in Gita to sort of add a few remarks based on Carlo's presentation before we hand over to Nabi. So over to you, Gita.
Thank you so much, Kaman. And hi, everyone. I'm Gita, as Kaman has already introduced me. Carlo, thank you so much for the presentation. I mean, all extremely interesting points. And, given that we worked in similar contexts, kind of hearing about how localization is being prioritized in the Ukraine response is extremely interesting. But I mean, what I'm also seeing, and I think this is part of the conversation that we'll have later, is, like you stated in your first slide, the actual percentage that's going to local NGOs is still extremely, extremely small. So how much of this ends up just being a ticking the box exercise or tokenism, and how much of it is actually real localization or a move in the right direction with a framework and systems and processes and tools that support it effectively? So these are some of the conversations that I look forward to having. I mean, I did have, some things that I wanted us to touch upon. When you spoke about equitable hiring practices, also questions on, why did NRC in Poland decide to take a complete partnership approach? And what were the indicators that NRC actually used to determine that this particular context would be viable for this particular type of programming? Are those indicators, can those indicators actually move beyond just Poland? Or is that kind of our hesitancy and our threshold for risk being lower that determines which context that can be applied to? And also, I think, one of the other questions that comes to mind, which, I hope we'll have an opportunity to discuss as well, is how do you determine which cohort of local organizations are the ones that become partners, right? So what are the factors that determine this? I mean, I understand this is part of, what you spoke about as well. There are elements of due diligence that are undertaken by various nonprofits before they decide upon who to partner with. But even prior to that, how do you decide which cohort are the ones that you should even undertake the due diligence with? So you have the white helmets in Syria, you have, organizations that work with the opposition forces in the opposition areas in Myanmar, for example. So how do organizations determine which direction they should take to begin with before they even initiate due diligence? So these are just some reflections and thoughts for us to discuss, after Nabi finishes his presentation. So over to you, Nabi, unless you want to just add on to this, Carlo, for a bit, or we can wait later as well.
Thank you, Gita, and thanks, Carlo, for his nice presentations. I have no comments because I was enjoying and learning the new perspective from that Ukraine and Poland and how they perceive the localizations. So maybe we'll discuss later on. And thank you for giving me the opportunity to come in and the HLA to share my personal experience. I want to take this opportunity to introduce myself also, because I think this is the first time for me to come in this, introduce with the other parts of the beyond the Asia actually. So I am actually still a newbie in this humanitarian and development sector, and like many others, I started in a national NGO in Bangladesh in 2013. Then I moved to UNDP Bangladesh and worked closely with the government capacity on the public service delivery. And later I joined in 2019 in Save the Children Country Office in partnership, and from 2022, I joined the regional office. So this is, in short, I actually work with the local NGO, government, and the international NGO, and closely with the CSOs. So in this forum, I want to share my personal experience. I'm not like that on behalf of the Save the Children. I will share a journey of mine while we are piloting a flexible funding modality during 2021 and in different parts of the world. So from that learning and that model actually scale up in our current program also. So we have some sort of learning at how we actually change the local partners' decision-making capacity and empowering them through the process. So I think is the next slide, come in. And another disclaimer, I am not a good presenter like Carlo and others. So if you can't understand any points I am sharing, please bring that attention to the comment and Gita so that I can, again, repeat that point. So the flexible funding approach we introduce in our with our partners, we call it internally core support model, but it's a flexible funding approach. And we can't mix it with the unrestricted funding. It's another disclaimer. It's not unrestricted funding. One of our colleague defined it tremendously beautifully, that is a flexible within the boundary. So this flexible funding approach actually introduced by our member is Sweden in 2021 by piloting in Asia, Africa, and LAC. And I was part of that piloting in Asia, in Bangladesh. And later it was scale up in SIDA CSO program 2022-2026, current SIDA CSO program global implemented by Save the Children in Asia, Africa, and LAC. And it's mainly derived from the commitment of AC Sweden's strategic period, their ambitions, and also the SIDA's priority. And with a view of to developing for a delivery model to a more relationship model, additional to project and program support. Like it's not based on the traditional project lock frame and project budgets. It's more focused on the relationship, empowering relationship between the donors and the local CSOs and intermediary organizations, local communities. And when we talk about that relationship model, and we actually provide the holistic support to CSO partner to implement their strategic plan. As I said, this project has no lock frame, the traditional lock frame or results management system. We actually provide support to the implementation of the CSO's own strategic plan. We know that strategic plan is a key document for the CSO partners, but in reality, we all know that it become self-documents. We actually forget about the strategic planning at some point, unless there is a donor requirement that you have to have a valid strategic planning to apply for any funding, right? So this is the first time we saw that, okay, we have some sort of funding opportunity to invest in CSO strategic planning. And there is another view which is aligned with the localization's ambitions, that it will allow the shifting the capacity, resources, and ownership to national and local actors, which will result in more timely, appropriate, and effective outcomes for child rights. As Save the Children is a child rights organizations, and we want to see the child rights as a key agenda. So we thought that this model will empower the national local actors more to addressing the child rights issues in their own context. And another thing is key features of this model is that this CSO partner is seen as an actor in its own right. What does mean? I will share in later more. That means that it's their decisions, their design, as this is that their strategic plan, right? Their objectives. So it is about how SCI and we can contribute to their mission and visions for the child rights and child participation situation in their context. So we see the CSO as an actor in its own right, not as like that we are coming and prescribing themselves some sort of activities, program objectives. It's not like that. And as I said, all processes should be demand driven and partner led. It's not like the SCI is sharing, okay, we need to address these current issues, emerging issues in your context. It's not like that. It's partners who decide what issues they should address. And there is a collaboration plan there, between the SCI and CSO partners based on their annual operational plan and strategic plan. And only through that collaboration plan, SCI and CSO works together under this model. Next slide. Now, I just want to share it actually how this model look like. This model has actually 5 components. We work with the CSO partners through the 5 components. First one is program development and technical expertise, where actually we share the technical and methodological support in child rights and child participant issues, and also acting as a broker. Broker in a sense, if a partner has a strategic ambitions, child rights actors has a strategic ambition that they want to work or expand their work in humanitarian sector or climate change or a new arena in relation to their child rights and child participations ambitions. What we do that we connect them with the expertise from the child rights, climate change actors, sectors, humanitarian sectors, so that they can learn together. They can exchange their learnings. They can grow together. So we play a brokering role at that perspective. Then another area we work together is a joint advocacy, which is as equal partners targeting a common goal and agenda. As I said, that there is a annual collaboration plan based on the partner strategic plan and annual operational plan. We set some sort of common agenda. Okay, this year we will work on this advocacy agenda, which we will do together, which SCI and the partner will run at certain level, maybe in the national context or regional context. Then another component, which is a very interesting one, organization capacity development, which focus on the good governance. Not only the good governance, it's actually support the partners to be more sustained in the changing context. Like we actually use the interact model of the 2B, 2 relate, in case you know about that. Based on that, we have some sort of tools we develop and we share with partners. Then partners run their self-assessment and identify the improvement area in different functional like governance, HR, finance, communications, and their networking abilities. And based on that, they prioritize some actions and develop a OCD plan, which they share with their donors, other donors also. Like, see, we have a OCD plan, see where you can invest in our organization capacity development. So it's a harmonized effort also to capacitate the partners and CSO partners to grow more. And then the fourth one is the strategic funding. That is the core funding towards the strategic plan. As I said, flexible but not unrestricted, because we have a collaboration plan based on their strategic ambitions and objectives, where we decide jointly that where SCI will put more effort to achieve or amplify the child rights outcomes. And another last one is the financial sustainability. It's also more about to transfer the technical knowledge from our side, how to mobilize the resources, also give the access to our donor base, our donor database. Like I can share an example. recently, you know that SIDA open the CSO program for all over the globally, like any CSOs from the their selected country. Sorry, there is a pair calling is you can maybe there is a sound from outside, so apology for that. So we actually shared that circular of the SIDA with our local partners, and the local partners applied, and with great rigor, great joy of us, they actually proceed to the second stage also. So this is the actually the we want to create some opportunity, create some access for the local partners to get greater access to the the donor communities, so that they can be more financially sustainable and mobilize the resources from also from their local context. So these are the 5 components. And as I said, I will actually focus more on that how we actually change the mindset of our partners, rewiring their mindset to be more empowered. So for if you want to more about this course support, you can contact with us through the HLA. We can share more about this. But now we will share how actually took the approach to change the mindset of our partners to adopt this model. Next slide. The approach we followed when we how to change the relationship modality. 3 areas we work on. One was the mindset we said that I will share today now. And there was a agile practice also, like we adopted some sort of practices, because as Carlos said that our INGO policies and that they are very complex. Our structure, they are not responsive to such sort of flexible fundings. So we have to adopt some agile practice also. And as for agile practice, we have to also adapt the process, that how we can onboard that partners quickly, change that relations model quickly from the project-based relationship to the more about empowering relationship. So next slide. So as I said, I will only share today that how we actually work on the rewarding mindset of the partner. And I am saying that rewiring, not the decolonizing or some sort of the other terminology, because I feel like when we use the intellectual terminology like new colonialism, decolonizing, we narrow the scope. It's my personal opinion. Maybe we can discuss later on it. But my personal opinion is that we need to be more collaborative when we talk about any shifting in the relationship. So when we started to shifting that relationship more about, that based on the partnership principles, empowering relationships, we took 4 approaches. Not only the partners, also internally, because it's important to, that get the confidence of your internal staff also, because for them, it's also a huge change. So first one is our approach was leadership driven. Like in the project relationship, the CSO partners leadership, they actually involve at the initial stage. Later, there is a project managers and there are project focal. They don't involve day-to-day activities of the projects, right? But in this flexible funding modality is totally driven by the strategic plan of that particular partners, and that partners leadership is accountable for that strategic planning. So we actually involve the partner leadership from the very beginning and every stage of that processes, so they can own the whole relationship changes modality, the flexible funding modality. They can understand it, they can internalize it, so that it is actually investing in their own mission, own vision, not some sort of donor prescription. So that was the one of the key approach when we try to rewiring the mindset. Then another approach was reaching the partners transparently. When we started the piloting, we shared all the documents with the partners, and we said, listen, this is also new for us. We don't know what will happen after 1 year. Maybe it can be a scale up. Maybe donor will say, no, we'll not continue such kind of, that modality. We don't know about that. It's a learning opportunity for both of us. So together we can learn and grow. But this is the situation. This will happen, and this is the process. So when we reach the partners with transparently, we see that okay, partner took that challenges. Okay, we will learn together. We will see what will happen after 1 year. And there is another approach was co-wide transformation. It means that not only within the partners organizations, within our SCA part also, we have some sort of transformations, ways of working. Like I will share in the next slide how that happened. So it's not like that partners they changes their ways of working within themselves. It's also for us too. Because our program team and project team, they need to be in confidence that, okay, my role is not hampered, my role is not threatened by this modality. And there comes the fourth one, that clarifying what's in it for me. We actually clarified all the things, not only for the partners, also for our SA staff. Like, okay, your role will be this, like you are doing more operational roles right now. As a child-led advisor, as a child participant advisor, your role should be more technical. So in this relationship, you will shift towards more technical support role rather than your operational and day-to-day project management role. So these are the four approach we took when we introduced this model. And next slide. And interestingly, this is the point. So I will share one by one and that how that happened actually, the changes. The first changes was when we asked the partner to follow the strategic plan, not any project lock frame. That actually created confusion. Confusion in sense because most of the partners, we have 3 partners initially when we piloted. They don't have the updated strategic plan. As I said, that strategic plan is that became for many of us in many. I don't know about the other parts of the world, but for many of us in South Asia and Asia, more of a ornamental documents just for a donor requirement, donor compliance documents, rather than a practical one. So when we talk about the strategic plan, they have to review the strategic plan. They have to go through critically look into that strategic plan to make it more operational, more realistic. So that was an opportunity also for partner to, that refine their mission and vision and their ambitions also. So based on that, we have our organization annual plan and operational budget as a basis where we actually develop the collaboration plan. That's the one thing. That's the major shift from the traditional project log frame to your own strategic plan. So you are responsible for your mission and vision. That's the one major shift. Then another major shift was that we allow them to use their own policies. Now in our standard for SCI, our standard partnership agreement made it it's compulsory to partners to use certain policies of SCIs, like safeguarding policies, like our procurement policies and other things. But in this flexible funding modality, we have a donor condition, a simple donor condition, but partners were free to use their own policy. Given that when we assess the partners eligibility and readiness criteria, we assess those policies also, that okay, if there is any gap, partner are given time, some sort of time, like okay, next 6 months we will update, you will work on that policies gaps, and after 6 months you can use the policy for this funding and relationship. But for the meantime, you will use the SCI policy. So that's the things. They were free to use their own policy, but also and with an opportunity to update the policy, extend the policy further to become more relevant and up to date. And there is no donor reporting or intermediary organizations reporting templates. That's the another key changes. Though in this phase, we have some sort of reporting template for the core support partner, but that too we develop with the joint consultation with the partner. But initially, there was no reporting templates. Partner annual report actually was our reporting template, and their financial audit was actually our financial report. Like it's like when partner, that CSO partners, they annually publish their annual report based on their strategic plan and other things. So we say that, okay, you reflect your strategic plan progress and that annual plan, that will actually reflects our contribution also. So that's the one thing, another major changes. Second, another one is instead of traditional sub-audit monitoring, learning is an integral part of the whole core support model and in all components. We are now not going to a partner office to policing or investigating any gaps, any bill vouchers, any that program activities, how many participants were there, what is the signature. It's not like that. It's more about learning, that what learning you derive from your activities in this period, what were the failures, what were the success, what we can do more with together for the next year. And for the financial also, what are the your gaps and how we can support more to that reduce those gaps, capacity gaps, and strengthening your capacity. So it's more about a learning and sharing approach. And as I said before, for our SCI technical staff, they can concentrate more on the technical support role rather than the compliance and operational roles. What happened previously when they were in project relationships, it's like they have to deal with the day-to-day operations of the project's activities also. But they are now more focusing on the technical load, how they can support the partners to that share their expertise on the child participation and child rights issues more effectively. And most importantly, delegating decision-making authority to empower the CSO partners. That's another area we actually rewiring was happen, that we delegate the decision-making authority to the CSO partners more so that they can feel more empowered. And that the interesting story I will share in the next slide. How actually that happened. Okay. You can see the cartoons that present that. First cartoon is saying that please sign the agreement. We will explain it to you later. That was the previous relationship. Another NGO is thinking that they want to be a big NGO, so they need a strategic planning exercise funder, like another development INGO to fund the strategic plan. So this is our traditional mindset, right? So what we did that we empowered the CSO break free from this traditional mindset of seeking validation from intermediate organizations. How that happened? When we started the piloting, we suddenly saw that partners not only sharing the program related email, they are also started to sharing like their board meeting minors, their SMT meeting minors. Because as we are saying that you are now following your strategic plan, following your operational annual plan. So they thought we should share these decisions also with the CI and need their opinion. Then we said initially, no, we don't need to see those board meeting minors because we are not authorized to see those things and say anything about those. It's your internal decisions, internal management to run your organizations. We only will support you in the email or areas based on our collaboration plan, that issues. But still, we were receiving those mail. So what we did finally, that we ghosted them on those emails. Like we are responding the emails which has based on our collaboration plan activities, but we totally ignored the mail which they are sending, like we are now recruiting staff for course support program like resource mobilizations. Can you see the interview, their questionnaire, and share your opinion on their marking or something like that? We totally ghosted. We totally ignored that. And then the partner became confused. Like they call me, bhai, I send you an email, you replied that email, but you didn't respond to the email of the recruitment. Then we said, listen, it's your recruitment. You are following your policy. If your policy is okay, it's up to the standard, and we believe in you that you are following your policy, then why we should intervene, right? And why you are involving us? So then later the partner understand that they are now more free to take decisions by their own, and they feel empowered. And what happened actually, then I can come to the the second point, that actually foster more equitable and locally led decision making of partnerships. I can give you two examples. Like one of our core support partner, you may heard of them, CRC Asia. They are now taking like they have now developed their 20 years of strategic planning, and they are now more recognized than SCI, I think, in Asia as a childless actors. And they are now more involved in a regional level childless forum and other things, leading that platform, because they are one of the core support partners from the very beginning. And another partner from Bangladesh, they are now like involving different marginalized children in the decision making, program decision makings. Like they organized the art exhibition this year at the beginning of this year, where actually the street children, they came and they actually shared their opinion that how they want to see these organizations to work for them through the pictures, through the drawings of art. So this is actually an innovative ideas in coming from the partners, not like that we are sharing those ideas. That's the one thing. And also partners actually were more they are now more investing in their organization capacity development, because they now feel that there is changing is ongoing. Not only the localizations, funding is now shrinking. The global and national context is changing. They have to adapt the changes. So they are now more serious about how they can develop their capacity to remain sustained in that changing context. So these are happening. I don't say that okay, we change all the things in positive way, we are doing good, but still we have a lot of room to improvement. But what we are seeing, what we are observing right now, that now the local actors are having the feelings of the empower through this such kind of flexible model, and we are actually trying to promote this such kind of flexible model, funding model throughout the SCI with other donors also. We are now negotiating the other donors to replicate and scale up such models for other funding stream. So these are the overall. Now I can share my last slide, I think, about my personal reflection. Yeah, next slide. Okay, these are some self-reflection. I think many can differ with me, but I see the localizations because I work with the CSO partner maybe last 10 years, but I come from a family who are actually from the CSO backgrounds. My father has been a development and humanitarian workers for 30 years. My uncle has been like 20, 25 years. He's still working. My aunt is also like she's also with the, you know, about our interim government head, Dr. Yunus. She's one of the staff of the Dr. Yunus. So we saw the things in Bangladesh context. I from that and my working with the CSO partners, I have some sort of self-reflections. Maybe I can learn from you too, also the audience, because from the different contexts. When we talk about the localization, we should keep it organic for some period. Like we don't need to bound the localizations with some sort of differentiation, uniformity. Let be it developed organically, let it be the diverse and context specific and fit for purpose. Like the localizations in the Asia, particularly in South Asia, should be different from the South Asia because of the CSO culture and CSO history. Like we have the rich CSO history of the 50, 60 years, but in the maybe in the other parts of the world, in the Africa, it's different. So let's be it as it is. Let's develop the different localization models. After that, I think we can go for some sort of, you know, the terminology definitions. Like one of the debate is that who will be the local, who will be the national actors. I think we should not focus on that now. We should work more on the, as it then come to my second point, to see the localization as a movement. Because what I am facing in my context, in Asia context, that we are now seeing the localizations, little bit of funding trade or donor appetite to fulfill. We still don't see it as a movement, but we should see localization as a movement to change the way we are working towards our humanitarian and development sectors, or our delivery to commitments to our communities. And yes, my third reflections, maybe it will be a debate for our communities, that avoid of cloning of INGOs in localization streams and more focus on evidence, advocacy, and policy influence and role of communities. I am sharing it from a recent experience. You know that Bangladesh has experienced a paradigm shift. We actually, our Gen Z, which we have a negative perception over the years that they are not actually committed, they are not active, but they actually changed the regime that we couldn't, and they actually open up the new opportunity for us. And if you follow the news globally, you can see this wave from the Bangladesh already hit our neighboring country, India. Their Gen Z also now come out to the street to protecting their women rights, and also in the Pakistan. So I think it will ultimately hit all over the world, this Gen Z movement. And we as a CSO organizations, we as a CSO actors in humanitarian development, we should to understand this new generation, because our traditional supporters are the previous generations who are now disappearing from the scenario, the funding scenario, the supporting scenario, and this generation will be the key for us. But I still feel that if we continue to, you know, that make very much focus on the compliance and the process in the name of the localizations, we will miss that opportunity. And we will be, I think, left out by these new generations in next 5 or 10 years. We don't know. But so we have to avoid to cloning these INGOs. We have to focus more on the capacity, evidence, advocacy, and policy influence role of the communities, how we can involve these locally led things. So, and the last one, I think I am over time. So last one is, before shifting the power, we should think about the sharing the power, because in the name of the shifting power, we should question ourselves that are we shifting accountabilities to our local actors, like accountabilities of the compliance, accountabilities of funding responsibilities, rather than shifting the power. So let's start with the sharing the powers over the decision making authority and the resources. Then gradually, I think we can find out different models and pathway to how we can shift the powers to our local actors more and more. So thank you all. I think thank you for listening me and giving me this opportunity to share my experience. So thank you. Over to Kaman and Gita.
Hi, Nabi. Thank you so much. That was an extremely interesting presentation, and to kind of hear that one of the largest international nonprofits, Save the Children, is actually trying to undertake something that is quite revolutionary in our line of work, actually. So of course, I have 10,000 questions, which we currently don't have time to go through, and we also have a lot of questions that have come through the Q&A. But I just wanted to kind of start off with one or two of them. The first one related directly to your presentation, Nabi, in terms of scaling this up. And is this still going on? So are you still undertaking this pilot project on kind of, what did you call it, relationship model-based partnership? And how many agencies actually were part of this initial pilot? And is there a plan to scale this up not only in Bangladesh, but also potentially with SCI in other countries?
Okay, initially it was actually not only Bangladesh, piloted in Philippines, Latin America, and Asia in Bangladesh. 4 partners were involved, and they actually scale up in the SIDA CSO Global CSO program for 2022 and 2026 phase. But unfortunately, that SIDA canceled out all the CSO agreements this year. But what we heard that they actually like this idea of the core support. Maybe we will continue with the partners, and it's actually we have another core support partner in Nepal in this phase, and we are planning to have our other partners to onboard in the next phase of the SIDA CSO if awarded in Cambodia, in Sri Lanka, and also in the Africa and the Latin America. So it's yes, we are scaling up gradually, movement-wise, and we have planned to promote this core support modality, flexible funding modality with the other donors also.
Great, Nabi, thank you. So another question which kind of has come through a lot of other chat questions as well, so I'm going to summarize it to a certain degree, and this is both for Carlo and for you, Nabi. Maybe we'll start with Carlo, with you first. What does it actually take for an organization? And, Carlo, you're a regional director, you've been a country director, so you work kind of across different platforms of an organization. What does it actually take for an organization to commit to making real localization work, right? So part of what Nabi just spoke about is moving in the direction of what we can consider potentially localization in, maybe not completely in its truest form yet, but it's moving in the right direction. So in order to move in that direction, what does it take? So Carlo, if I can ask you that first, and then Nabi, you can maybe speak a little bit about what SCI has to do internally. Over to you, Carlo.
Yeah, thanks, Gita. I'm not sure it would be the same for every organization. I think it depends on who you are and your background and how you're set up and your mandate. But I think one of the things that's common is that there needs to be vision and leadership from the top. Because at least for an organization like NRC, whether it's changing the mindsets or changing the internal systems to be able to actually deliver in a different way, engage with local actors in a different way, if you don't have that strong leadership and vision from the top, it's very difficult to make change. And we have that. And Jan Egeland was the eminent person for the grand bargain on localization as well, and that helped push the organization a lot. Then I think it's really about having a different cultural mindset approach to what localization is across the different operational offices. And Nabi, thanks for the presentation. It was brilliant, and I'd be keen to learn a lot more about it. But going from a direct implementation approach to having staff who understand that that's actually what you're trying to do, what Nabi is talking about, is a mindset shift, co-creating with partners, giving power back to communities, giving power back to partners. Those are things that take time because You can do it through having different tools and new tools to help, but in the end, it's about getting people on board and getting staff on board who understand what you're trying to do from the conceptual perspective. So I think it's a combination of things, and probably not the same for every single organization, but with some common principles.
Thank you, Carlo. And Nabi, internally for SCI, what levers did you have to push to make this work? Because, you know, there are some things that you said in terms of it being heavy, in terms of internally it took a lot to mobilize that. So can you give us just maybe a few snippets of things that had to change?
I think what support us in this process is that our leader, that Carlos said, that leadership from the top of the Save the Children, our localization vision is very clear, that locally led, globally connected. And when we adopted this vision in 2021 and 2022, we actually started to changes our work streams. We have now introduced some sort of localization work streams, work on the mindset, behavior, work on our compliances, work on our partnership, equitable partnership approach. So different work streams are already introduced. They are working with the country and partners that and also gaining the insights that how we can be more adaptive, more flexible to become actors, leading actors in the localizations movement. And another key things we introduced, like we are now sharing the ICR with the partners. We have started to sharing that in not in across the all the context, but in different context. We are trying to sharing our ICR with the partners, and we are adaptive. And yes, that's the I will echo with the Carlo. The main challenge is the mindset, and it will definitely take time, because when you introduce new changes, and which is a lot in your ways of working, you always feel threatened as a people, because organizations are the people. So when people feel threatened, it will be like act as a barriers for the changes. So we have to work on that more and make them understand all that it will be for the better for our mission and visions. And also at the same time, we have to protect the individuals also in some sort of way. Yeah.
So another question kind of related to this, and something you had touched upon earlier, Nabi, when you were speaking, that you don't like using the word neocolonialism or decolonization. I mean, at the end of the day, you know, when most organizations speak about localization, it's kind of seen as a form of neocolonialism, right? Where local organizations, including the ones that, you know, I've worked with for an extended part of my career, is we are basically trying to get them to adopt the way we work, which is the global north, because the donors are in the global north. So we want them to follow our systems, our processes, our approaches, no matter how complicated they are, no matter how heavy they are. And I know the grand bargain speaks about making changes in that, but change has been very slow in coming, right? So, I mean, for example, Nabi, you're speaking about something that we're doing now with this particular pilot, which is, you know, a few years old, but localization has been a conversation that has been ongoing for decades now. So the conversation started then. We are finally reaching some point where we can gain a little bit of traction. So a question that came up quite repeatedly, actually, in the conversations and in the Q&A from guests that are part of this webinar today, is how long will it actually take for localization to become effective as a process? And how long will it take for us to build the capacity of local partners so they can then work effectively? For me, it's almost like the second question shouldn't be part of the first, because again, we're speaking about neocolonialism. But I'll start with you, Nabi, and then move on to Carlo.
Okay, first of all, Gita, you rightly said localizations actually started way back from the effective agenda and the Busan principles. And in our context, it's actually 90s. We saw lots of NGO capacity strengthening local initiatives. But I was not too much optimistic of the localizations till the movement Bangladesh experience this year. Like when I saw the JNG, I talked with them. I actually, when during the movement, I talk with them, I try to understand that what they are how they are seeing the world for them, right? And I feel like it's not the 90s and 80s anymore. Like you come as a, you know, global north, share some prescriptions, and we have to accept that. It's not like that. So things are changing and moving fast. I think we will experience new sort of relationship models between the global north and global south in the next 3 or 4 years. I don't know, but I'm very optimistic, which will be more collaborative. Maybe then localizations will be can play as a catalyst for that. So I am optimistic in that way. So that's why I am now not using like new colonialism, decolonization debate, because I think we should that's for my personal opinion, that actually narrow down our vision for the opportunity we are missing out. So that's the one thing. And when you see another thing, when you ask for capacity building of the partners, I sort of now I can share you my personal thinking about that. Why we have to use the term building? That means we are now thinking that there is no capacity in the local actors. Now, few are opposing that. No, we are not going to use the capacity building. We will use the term capacity strengthening. Then again, the question is that who to decide that we need the strengthening, capacity strengthening for the local actors? Why we are assuming they should need to be strengthened? So instead of that capacity building and strengthening, I think we should recognize that we should share the capacity, exchange the capacity. We should recognize that there is already a capacity exists there, and we should come with the approach that how we can derive the learning from there, and we can share our expertise with that local capacity. In that way, I think partner will be more feel empowered, and I think more internalize the capacity interventions. The way we are now delivering the capacity interventions to the local partners that are actually tick of mark exercise, they don't internalize it. So once we introduce the capacity exchange and sharing options, I think they will feel empowered, and they will then move forward with that new capacity in their localization context. Yes, over to you.
Thank you, Nabi. Carlo, just kind of a follow-on question to this for you. In terms of donors, right? So I mean, you know, in your role, in your position, you work with donors extensively. I mean, there is an appetite where they speak about, okay, we want to do this. But the reality doesn't always match what they're saying, because they're not necessarily willing to lower their risk appetite. They still want things to stay the same, but to bring in localization. I mean, what do you see are the ways in which we can potentially overcome this with donors? Like, how can we reach this next phase? Are there ways in which this can be done?
Thanks, Gita. It's very difficult because you have some donors, and Nabi mentioned Sweden, and I saw in the chat people talk about the Nordic donors who have a certain flexibility, risk appetite, conceptual understanding of localization and willingness to invest in it. And then you have other donors who perhaps have people in the organization who feel similarly, but have systems and structures in place which are extremely restrictive. And it's difficult to see how those are going to change quickly. I think that because so many of our main donors' funding is tied to government policy and regulation in the home country, taxpayers' money, due diligence, it's going to be very hard to just imagine that suddenly we can convince BHA, FCDO, GFFO to open their books in the way that we engage with perhaps, you know, NMFA or CEDA. So the question is, and this has kind of been a role that INGOs have taken on, right? And donors have asked INGOs to come in and say, listen, we have strategic relationships with you. So can you take this on, because we want to achieve more money going to local actors, but we can't give it directly, and therefore we need to channel it through you. Now, I think the big change that's happening now is that INGOs, instead of saying, yes, okay, we can work with partners, take the money, sign this agreement, and now go and do what we tell you to do, or try and become a mini SAVE or a mini NRC. We as organizations are saying, hang on a minute, we have a fundamental role in contributing to the localization agenda. So if the money does have to come through us because donors aren't going to change their policies quickly, we are massive agents of change for actually making localization happen and supporting civil society to a point where it can start to access that funding directly. And then there are some positive studies. So for example, in Poland, for the first time in NRC's history, we are the technical sub-partner to a national organization in a kind of consortium. So they are the lead. The national NGO is the lead. NRC is the traditional implementing partner, if you will, accessing funding through a different funding mechanism, which they can access because they're a big national actor and they actually have worked internationally as well. So the other thing I would say is that every relationship is different. And it's also dangerous to generalize. And I agree with what Nabi said. I think the times have changed, and I think it's much more positive now. But there's still a long way to go. And on the donor side, I think change will be difficult and take a long time.
Carlo, I'm going to actually put this question to Nabi first, and then Carlo, if you have a follow-up response to it as well. And I want to touch upon something you just mentioned here, Carlo, the fact that, donors want this agenda to become our agenda as well, right? So they want localization. They can't really undertake localization because of, the risk issue with their host governments. And so they kind of, in a way, transfer that burden onto international NGOs and say, hey, now you take this and you undertake localization for us. But then they also tie our hands to a certain degree, not necessarily providing us the space, the humanitarian space within which we can actually undertake localization in a way that doesn't burden the local partners and doesn't make them into mini saves and mini NRCs. So my question, to this is, are there ways to break the shackle? I mean, can we? Or it's actually impossible because our money all comes from the same place. So are there ways in which we can actually overcome this, or this is just something we just have to live with and work within the system and around the system to make it a reality and hope that, like the Nordic donors, the other donors also wake up and say, okay, there are other ways in which we can do this. Nabi, do you want to take this one?
Okay, I can go first. For me, that's why I was saying that instead of we can bound the localization in certain definitions and that terminology, we should allow the localizations to grow organically first, so that we can have some sort of modalities, different models for different contexts, and we can, on that models, we can then pursue the governments, then influence the governments to adopt one of those models which is fit for their purpose. Yes, we can't change the government perception over the night, but we have to push the agenda gradually. Like first, they have to accept that there is the ways of. I can share you one experience when we went to a workshop recently in Coxsbazar Rohingya response, like last 2 years back, not recently. The government official were expecting to receive the, I think, file folders and the backpack. One of the government, and when we share distribute nothing, we just distribute a lunch and then the hand notes. And he said, why there is no backpacks? Previously, in every training of your INGOs, I used to have the backpacks. So I said, sir, now the funding is not allowed this. Do this. No, you should allow funding. Why this funding card for these backpacks or something like that? Then I realized actually it's we have to change also the approach when we interact with the government also, because we actually build some sort of notion, perceptions about our ways of working within the government. So we have to work on that, how we can change that perceptions. And good thing is that now the new generations of civil officers are coming to the scene. So they are more knowledgeable and they have more access to the new knowledge. So I think we can change the perception first, work on that, then we can push our agenda gradually.
Great, Nabi. Yeah, go ahead, Carlo.
I can add a couple of things, I think, in terms of, and trying to be a bit more optimistic as well. And there are some good things happening, like I mentioned in the response. And I think if you look at things like the UN pooled fund, that is a mechanism which can be leveraged in different responses to directly engage local and civil society. And so I think it's about trying to explore and advocate, and that's a collective responsibility. And that's where I see our role as INGOs as being extremely important. It's on the policy and the advocacy side of things, and pushing and using our leverage at different capital levels to try and keep this top of the agenda, but then using mechanisms like the pooled funds, making sure that they get really leveraged to the max, and then starting to really document success stories and breaking down some of the narratives and some of the perceptions and saying, hang on a second, look, this is actually working, it's working well, and you can be a bit less worried and take a bit more risk next time. And I think that with gradual steps like that, we can see progress.
No, that's absolutely right, Carlo. And I think, kind of hearing SCI stories and the stories that you put forward today on things that are happening in Poland with NRC, these are, both of you work for large international organizations. And the fact that the leadership of these organizations is making a concerted effort to move in this direction and is working with its team and it's working with its partners and its donors is an extremely positive sign. I had a kind of a follow-on question for you on that, Carlo. So for you personally, when you kind of speak about localization and you consider a story successful, what are the indicators that you look for to say, okay, this particular project that we did with this local partner, I consider it successful? And why would you then consider it successful?
Yeah, thanks, Gita. That's a tough question because I think you can measure it in many different ways. I mean, there are now frameworks as well for measuring, and I think that came up in the questions as well. There are frameworks and indicators and ways to try and kind of document success in terms of localization. I think that's important, but fundamentally, I think here in NRC, at least in this response, we're trying to give power back to the community and give decision-making authority back to the community and the people who we're working for. So I think it's looking at a project and seeing whether it's successful, or a relationship and seeing whether it's successful. I would say we're asking ourselves these questions. Have we increased the decision-making power of the communities that we're working with? Have they played a role in creating and co-creating the program design from the beginning? Have they been the one to identify the priority needs and design the response in a way that is in line with humanitarian principles? To which extent have they delivered outcomes on that objective? So I think it's not really about having a set of very, very clear indicators, but it's about really, for us, having successfully implemented this new vision of relationship that we have, which is everything but the fact that you've signed a partnership agreement. It's much more about whether you've created a relationship which is complementary and adding value to the organization that you're working for.
Absolutely true, Carlo. And I think, those are the success stories that, as a humanitarian kind of aid professional, you kind of hold on to and be like, okay, so it is possible, and we can kind of propagate this and scale it up. Nabi, I had two follow-on questions for you. There's a question here from Lorena, who's basically asking, how is localization different from decentralization and I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, subsidiarity? I don't know, maybe you're a partnership guy, maybe you know what this means better than I do. But this is her first question. And then a second question, which again, something that I touched upon at the beginning of our conversation, was how do you decide who are the local actors you should even be partnering with, and who gets to decide this? So her question touches upon this, is why aren't social movements mentioned among local actors? So why aren't social movements part of localization? Again, similar to what's happening in Myanmar with opposition forces and so on and so forth. Over to you, Nabi.
Okay, for the first question, this is still not clear to us also, that is localizations means decentralizations and subsidizations. But within the SCI, we are actually very much clear about that we want localization as a transformation approach, not a decentralization approach. But yet we are also not clear that how we can do that. So sorry, I can't give you any concrete answer on that first questions. But definitely our approach and our vision is to become more transformative towards the localizations, to shifting or sharing the powers towards more about the local actors. Rather than subsidize any our national office or something like that, or any partners. And for the last questions, I think you were talking about the social movements, like why. See, from my perception, I want to see the localizations as a movement, because what I feel if we see the localizations as a movement, we can then focus on the changes we are aspiring to know that see within our communities. My movement aspiration is narrow, more narrow than what Lorena actually asked. My perception of the movement is to see focus on the changes within our sectors first, so that we don't rely on the, that what I feel that now the actors are now focusing on the fundings, compliances through the localizations. They are taking this another donor trends, nothing else. Like, the wave of the strategic planning in the 90s, different NGO capacity strengthening, in the name of that, we provided support to the local NGOs to develop the strategic planning. So they still see these localizations as a donor appetite, not as a ways of changing work in our sectors, both in development and humanitarian. So that's why I am saying that we should see this localization as a movement of changes. I hope that will answer clear my terminology. And another thing, I missed the second question, I think, in between question.
Yeah, I think the second question, I don't know if we have enough time for that, because I feel like that requires almost a longer conversation, but we can leave it here as food for thought in terms of how do you determine who are the partners that you should be partnering with? Before you even get to the due diligence stage as an SCI or an RC, how do you select that initial list of partners? Who decides where you go and who you partner with? So I think a little bit more along those lines, which also connects to social movements that are taking place globally, whether it's in a conflict zone or otherwise. But Nabi and Carlo, just to kind of wrap up, we just have a few minutes left. I wanted to kind of hear, Carlo, from you first, and then from you, Nabi, kind of last words of wisdom. We have a lot of people on this webinar today, a lot of them, young practitioners who have joined from all over the world. You both are tie-dyed humanitarian aid workers. So kind of wanted to hear from you just a few words of wisdom on, how do you give them hope that we are moving in the right direction? And what are the things that they should be looking out for and they should be promoting in the work that they're doing? Carlo, over to you first.
Thanks, Gita. That's it's a big responsibility. But what I hope is that today's presentations have shown people that change is possible, and that even change from organizations who have traditionally worked in a very different way, not only is change possible, change is coming. And I think the ship has sailed. And I think that people are on board, and it will take time. But I think that for all the people out there listening, it's about asking the right questions. It's about respecting where you're working, believing in local knowledge, and creating powerful relationships with organizations where you're working, and trying to make sure that they are the ones who are designing your programs and not vice versa. And always be willing to learn, be willing to question, be willing to challenge, and accept that change takes time. So not to be disheartened. I'll stop there. I'm not sure if it's Gita.
Thank you, Carlo.
Or me.
It's my connection. It's my connection. Over to you, Nabi. Thank you, Carlo.
Thank you. I just want to echo with Carlo that we should bring the mutual trust terminology from our policy papers to the practice. We should trust the local partners' capacity. We should trust them. So once we trust the process, trust them, I think change will definitely started to happen. And yes, as Carlos said, it always started. Maybe it will reach later in the different parts of the world. But yes, from I can again say about Bangladesh, because we didn't know how this regime will be like. We can have our freedom of speech even at the one month back. But now we have that freedom of speech. Certainly, without without any indication, suddenly our youth came out in the street and they fought for it. They gave their thousands of youth gave their lives, right? So we have to trust the process. We have to trust the partners and the change process. I think that will key for us. I think I am very optimistic on that. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gita, Nabi, and Carlo, for such an excellent and informative discussion. I've really learned a lot. I can see that even though Nabi and Carlo, you're sharing perspectives from in different contexts, different parts of the world, there are so many commonalities in your sort of what you're advocating and need for change. And I like how you've ended on a very optimistic and positive note. So thank you for those presentations and that discussion. facilitated by Gita. Thank you for all your brilliant questions, Gita. Really appreciate that. So I'm just going to take the final minute to just wrap up. So thank you once again to our panelists, facilitator, and everyone for joining us. When this webinar comes to a close in just a minute, a Zoom survey should pop up on your screen. So with just 2 quick questions. So if you could just take the time to just fill those in, that would be helpful for us to keep improving these webinars and ensuring that the content is relevant for you. As I've mentioned, keep an eye on your inbox for 2 separate emails from us. In the next 24 hours, you'll receive a copy of the recording and slide deck from the presenters, and then you'll receive a separate email before the end of the week with your HPAS digital badge, and that's in recognition of your learning and engagement in this learning space today. So yeah, keep an eye on your inbox and feel free to email us with any comments or suggestions for future sessions. And then if you're keen to explore more content and voices on localization, we've just released a brand new podcast this week, and I have a conversation with Bijan Nashat, who's the co-founder of a tech firm and former Save the Children international leader. So it's a really insightful discussion, a half-hour discussion, so please do listen to that. If that's of interest, I'll include the link in the post-event email. And then our friends tomorrow at Trust Consultancy and Development are running a webinar on localization and accountability to affected populations. So that's tomorrow at 4 o'clock Turkish time. So again, I'll include the link in the post-event email. And our next webinar will take place on the 19th of September, and that's penciled in for the same time, 11 o'clock British Summer Time, where we'll be exploring innovative finance mechanisms. So this is a session that will be hosted by our Deputy Director for Impact and Influence, Paval Mania. So please do sign up for that if that's of interest. Oh, that's it. So that's all that's left for me to say is to say thank you very much, Nabi, Carlo, and Gita, and thank you very much to everyone joining us for today's webinar. Thank you very much.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.